Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining. I'm calling this clinic "What's New on the Old Ma and Pa?" And I gave this clinic a couple of years ago and went back to update it, thinking that I'd just change out a few slides, and wound up it's mostly new completely. So I guess that's a good thing. Shows I've actually made some progress since the first time I delivered this, but. There's quite a bit going on in the old Ma and Pa in my basement, and appreciate you spending a few minutes to learn about it. Hopefully, it'll be interesting, and some of my experiments will give you something to work with yourself. This is a version of the clinic. I have another clinic that I've done for the division. Which focuses more on the history of the Ma and Pa itself and how I got to the design. But this really focuses on the model and what I'm doing. I'm trying to represent it on my layout. So what I'm going to do today is give you a very brief overview of the prototype and the track plan, and then a sort of a photo tour of some of the more finished scenes on the railroad, especially the town at High Rock, Pennsylvania. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on my adventures with 3D printing, which have gotten more intense since I talked to you, and an update on the affectionately named Helix from Hell, Bridges and Trestles, some of my operational experiments, and what's up next. So that's the program, basically. I started building about 6 years ago. I'm modeling the Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad, also known as the Ma and Pa, on May 5th, 1924. And I picked that date for several reasons. It happens to be my mother's actual birthday, but it also had some other advantages in terms of the rolling stock that I liked versus what I didn't like that came up later, and the fact that at the time the Ma and Pa was fairly prosperous railroad, and so that fit in with my modeling goals. I've got about 30 by 14 feet to deal with. Have gone to 3 decks in that space, which is so far a successful experiment. I'll talk about it a little more as we go along. Got a 27-inch minimum mainline radius, which looks pretty good on the small steamers and the older rolling stock, and I've kept the grade to a maximum of 2%. It's important to me to have a railroad that is operation oriented. So I'll talk a lot about that, even though I'm not doing operating sessions yet. I wanted to have something that would be very, very useful and very practical for operation, and a lot of fun to work. And also wanted to replicate a lot of the signature scenes, the things that the Maryland and Pennsylvania was known for. So it really represented the layout or the prototype well. And I kind of surprised myself. This was a midlife crisis as it went to go from what I had been modeling up until that point, which was, chassis system in the 70s, which, like most of us, I was modeling what I grew up with. And life had a few changes to throw at me, and I said, this is time to do something else. And I thought about, what I really like to do. And one thing was operations, of course, and in the 20s, prototype operations featured a lot more locals, switching, yard work, mixed consists, things like that people really like to operate on. And it also is it's not an unmodeled era, but it's also one where everything isn't available ready to run. And so it's going to force me to do a fair amount of scratch building, and I like that as well. So I knew my railroad wasn't going to look like everybody else's. So the Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad was known as a short line, a very short line, and it had very sharp curves. It had hilly, scenic terrain. The trains were short, but as the short line went, there was quite a bit of traffic in the 20s, a lot of different industries, and there's quite a bit of documentation out there between the Historical Society and just a lot of fans that the prototype has had. Also had some great town names, some of which are on the railroad, like Little Gunpowder and Minefield and Yo and things like that. So anyway, much to my surprise, I started modeling the Ma and Pa in 1924. Now this is the classic Ma and Pa shot, the one freight car on the trestle. This is fine, it's cute, but I was really looking more for something like this, which is the same trestle from a different angle at a different time, and what you can see is double or a helper, a mid-train helper, pulling a reasonably long freight train across the trestle, and it was this kind of operation that I thought would be really interesting. So I wanted to make sure I could handle it. Let's see here. So this is sort of what I came up with. Here's one scene, and there it is in color for sort of the look and feel I'm going on. That's consolidation number 23. One of the 6 280s that Ma and Pa had, and that's a brass model painted and weathered on my behalf, pulling a freight train through a typical Ma and Pa kind of scene. So let me go through the track plan for a few minutes. Some of you have maybe seen this in earlier presentations, but I'm pretty pleased with how it's coming out in terms of representing what I was trying to represent. Now, this is the route of the prototype Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad. Started in Baltimore, quite close to my house, which was part of the motivation. And as many of you know, York is about 40 miles from Baltimore as the crow flies, and it took the Ma and Pa about 72 miles to get there. So as you can see, it took a rather long route with a lot of twists and turns and sharp curves along the way, which again, for modeling purposes, was a lot of fun. But the prototype started in Baltimore, not too far from Penn Station, for those of you who know where that is. Went pretty due north to what was then known as Towsontown, now known as Towson, of course, headed over toward Bel Air, then went north again to the Pennsylvania state line and crossing it at about where Delta is, then took a left turn and went northwest toward York, passing through Red Lion, and finally winding up in York. And it interchanged with the Pennsylvania and Baltimore and Ohio in Baltimore, and again in York with the Pennsylvania and Western Maryland. So there was really a fair amount of bridge traffic in addition to local traffic to handle there along the way. So a lot of possibilities. So this is the track plan, and this is to orient you. Over here on the lower right is the stairs down to the basement, and the Baltimore terminal is along the long wall here, with the passenger station here. Now it's been around a corner that wasn't prototype, but it's really very close to the track layout of the prototype, including, and this is one of the benefits of modeling a short line in the 20s, is many of these tracks are exactly the same length, scale, full scale for HO as the prototype. So this yard, classification yard, not only is really weird, but it's full size. It's not compressed at all, which I think is fun. Neither is the freight house or the turntable or a lot of these other things that are represented in full scale. So anyway, on the track plan, north toward York is always to your left, and south toward Baltimore is always to your right if you're looking at the shelf. So it proceeds around the corner here, through the little area of Evergreen, which is still in city limits, very close to my house now, through Woodbrook, which is, for any of you familiar with Baltimore, is where Eddie's is on Charles Street now, very close to there, up through Towson, then known as Towsontown, and on the railroad, it then enters a helix and goes to the second level, which I will switch to here. So you come out of the helix here, headed into Baldwin, Maryland, and again, because of the way the helix is arranged, you're going still left is still north toward York, and then through Falston, through the wooded area here, and into Bel Air, Maryland, which was sort of the one of the major towns on the railroad. It really sort of skirted the northern edge of Bel Air as we know it today. There was Wye. There was the famous Gross Trestle, which I'll talk about more in a few minutes. That was the largest and longest trestle on the Monpah, and enters the helix again, makes one more turn, and winds up coming out here. And the third level, Whiteford, Maryland, again, still proceeding. So the left is always the north direction. The milling and mining area of Stazo Milling here in Whiteford. Cardiff crosses the state line, hits Delta, and then goes through some of the Pennsylvania countryside to High Rock, Felton, and eventually Red Lion. And then Dallastown here. Meanwhile, the main line disappears back into the helix and goes back down. So up here is the highest point of the railroad here in Red Line, and then it enters the helix and goes back down, and I'll go backwards back to where it comes out, which is here in the eastern part of York. So York is now down just a little bit higher than Baltimore, and the reason I did all this is to have the yards at a comfortable operating level rather than have York be way up in the stratosphere. But the prototype did that too. In other words, Red Lion was the highest point on the prototype, and York and Baltimore Baltimore was about the lowest, and York was just a little bit higher in terms of above sea level. So that gives you an overall view of things. It's definitely a work in progress, but some of the areas are starting to get where I want them to. And as I mentioned, I'm trying to replicate some of the signature scenes. Now here is what the Baltimore terminal looked like a little later than my period. This was, I think, from the 40s. And those of you who are familiar with Baltimore, this is toward downtown over here. This is Jones Falls, which now lies under the Jones Falls Expressway 83. And the Pennsylvania Station is back behind some of this stuff in the distance. And this here was the interchange with the Pennsylvania. This here is the interchange going up to the B&O, which the Mount Royal Station is over in this area. And so this is where the Trolley Museum has been. Then this is the big Monpah Roundhouse, which is still, it's a ruin, but it's still there, and you can see it when you go up 83. This is Falls Road, following the same route it does today. So a lot of this is very visible, even though none of the track and the structures are there anymore. So this is what it's looking like on the model so far, and you can see I've worked hard to sort of capture the shape of the line as well as the trackage. So this is looking south, and the station will be over here in the distance when it's done. This is the turntable, no roundhouse yet. And this is, like I mentioned, the classification yard where the tracks are the same length they were in the prototype. This is the coal trestle. There was actually another coal trestle in Baltimore, and I did leave that out. But again, these are two prototype scale, so there's no compression on them at all. And Here's a prototype photo of number 27, a 10-wheeler up on the cold trestle. So apparently this was a part of the operation. And here's number 28 on the model in a similar pose. This is a Bachmann 10-wheeler, and I'm sure at some point someone will point out the things that are not prototypical about it, but it's really a pretty nice locomotive. It runs very, very well. And so someday maybe I'll figure out if there are things that I ought to be fixing to make it look more like the prototype. But in the meantime, it's doing a very good job for me. Here's number 6 sitting on the turntable in front of the roundhouse, and a rare color photograph. Numbers 4 and 5 and 6 were American types. And again, Bachmann makes a reasonably good representation of it in HO, and that's the turntable minus the roundhouse, which is a future project for me as well. And this is at the north end of the Baltimore terminal. The main line actually, this must have been after it was not in service anymore, because this is the main line crossing Falls Road and heading out this way. This is the City Ice Co. And this is this building has changed hands several times, but on my railroad, it is the Potts and Callahan Paving Company. So that building, although modified, still exists on the prototype today. And on the model, this is we're looking in the generally north direction, and the main line's disappearing off into the sort of cut there. And this is where the City Ice Co. will be, and this is Potts and Callahan Paving getting a shipment of a Baltimore and Ohio boxcar. So I mentioned Evergreen. This was about the only photograph I have of it. Little coal trestle, team track, and oil tank. And so that's about what that looks like now on my railroad from a slightly different angle. Coming along, needs some work, but starting to look like something there. Then the Ma Pa went through Roland Park and several of the private schools that are still there. So these are some kids watching a train come by, and this is sort of a similar scene. And the shelf here is only maybe 12 inches wide, so getting a lot of value out of a little bit of space. And there's obviously a gentleman who is outstanding in his field. This is a train, passenger train, typical Ma and Pa, RPO and coach, headed south toward Baltimore at Woodbrook, which again is the little area right next to Eddie's on Charles Street, and it comes into the this building over here was actually the original station, but I think they kept it as a maintenance shed after it was replaced by this one, which is where there's still a gas station there. Still,
oh yeah, well, we did the photography.
This is right next to Eddie's, where Eddie's is now. There's still a gas station there, and in typical Ma and Pa fashion, it was double purpose. They were too cheap to build stations in general that were all by themselves. And this is my model of the same area with what was at that point Charles Street, and the 3D printed Model T there sitting under the awning at the company, still lacking some signage and other things, but coming along. Jumping to Bel Air, which is not very far along, but I've scratch built a couple of the structures, and the good thing is there are no real good pictures of this, so nobody can tell me I'm too far off, but they're coming along. The freight cars are Tichy kits, of which the 122 was shortened to a prototype length. That's a model of the real thing. And here's one of the 060 switchers. I have number 29. There was also number 30. Again, brass models. I did not do the painting and remotoring, but they're nice little engines and a lot of fun to use for switching. Now we're jumping into Pennsylvania. This is my version of the typical Ma and Pa passenger train. This point headed south toward Baltimore. This a lot more trees needed in this scene, but this is up on the top level at this point, and it's coming into the town of High Rock, Pennsylvania, which again is one of the more finished areas, although it has plenty of detail left to be done. But it's again part of my attempt to replicate the prototype at my area as much as possible. And what you're seeing here, and we're about where we would be if we were sitting on the pilot of the passenger train coming. So this is looking south toward Baltimore, and we're in Pennsylvania at this point. This is the Ma and Pa station in High Rock. Again, a multi-purpose structure. This is freight house. This is a creamery, and off to the left here is a cannery. And there is a spur that is behind these ties stacked here, along with somebody's house on the corner there. So this is what it looks like now. This is the cannery, scratch built. This is the freight house scratch built. This is the station and store, and that's the creamery. And this is a little bridge which appears in some of the other shots, all 3D printed to look very much like the original. There's the bridge. That's the only photo I have of it. Again, the station and the store, the freight house and the house in the back, and this is sort of from the back side of the same thing, so you can see the cannery in the distance there. There's a lot of imagination goes into trying to figure out what is either too fuzzy to make out or too far in the distance. But here's the station and store, and this was obviously very exciting whenever this photo was taken. This has to be pretty early with all the wagons here, everybody out to get in the picture, including this dude lying apparently on the station platform. But a lot of interesting and unique details on this store, none of which are commercially available, of course. And so I wanted to capture it as best I could, including this sort of filigree here on the peak of the roof and the detail in the windows and these very strange columns here. And I knew I was going to need to do something, so I decided to 3D print them. So first step in doing something like this for me is to design it up in my CAD program, so I have some sense of what it looks like. And then I went from there to now this is actually a foam core mock-up of the creamery that's sat next to the station, but it's very useful to get a sense of how big it is and where it's going to sit on the scenery. And then this one I actually cut the pieces out on a Cricut machine, and that was before I invested in my own 3D printer, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And not found the Cricut to be worth the trouble in general, but I did design up the details I needed in SketchUp, and these are the two copies of in case I messed up, one of the copies of the detail above the roof line and the columns, and then also the ice, I forget what they call those things, but they sit on the edge of the roof to break up the snow and ice on the roof, and they were quite prominent in some of the pictures. So here's the model. Needs a lot of people and to be sunk into the scenery a little bit more, but you can see it's come out pretty well, and I think it's a nice representation of the prototype, which is there's the prototype shot again. So a lot of details I want to capture from the people in the horse and buggy, and a lot of stuff sitting around on the station platform, but getting there anyway. I mentioned 3D printing. I have become the owner of my own 3D printer since I gave this clinic the first time, and have been spending entirely too much time messing with that, but coming out with some pretty good results that I'm excited about. And again, it's it's a bit of a revolution in our hobby, and I think as it gets easier and more practical, it's going to provide great benefits for doing stuff that doesn't look like everybody else's all the time. It's in my experience so far, the detail is really starting to rival injection molded styrene. A lot of things that have never been produced or are very hard to find that you can print up for yourself. It's very handy for things that you need a lot of copies of, like nut bolt washer castings and switch stands and telephone poles and windows and things like that. And it's also relatively easy to get the precision you need for scratch building if you're not a super skilled with plastic or other materials. Some of the challenges that remain, the materials can be pretty brittle, so they're not good for everything, certainly. And nobody's kidding about the learning curve. I've literally printed things 14 or 15 times before I got it the way I wanted it, and have learned how to not do just about everything along the way. But given that, I wouldn't go back. And so one of my projects has been Caboose number 2005, which ex-Pennsylvania, but a unique car, certainly not something that I think has been produced as a very prototypical version of this car. Did have, in this case, some plans, although when you get into actually trying to design something in 3D, you find out how much the plans don't show you. And only a couple of prototype photos that are existing. And as you can see from this one, you can make out a certain amount of detail, but you have to imagine some of the rest. So hopefully I won't meet somebody who knows it any better than I do. So here's the design in SketchUp, and you can see that I've got everything drawn in, but there's some parts that I knew were not going to be very practical in 3D, such as grab irons and wires like these that are securing the cupola. So I chose to do those much like a resin kit out of phosphor bronze wire. On the other hand, some other details like the underframe here and the springs and the little bolts and things like that come out pretty darn well, and it beats the heck out of having to put them all together one at a time. Now here's part of this, sort of illustrates the methodology I'm able to use when designing. And what I've done here is take those plans and imported them into the SketchUp program and put them, in this case, twice, once on the X angle and once on the Y angle. And by setting the program to no perspective, I can essentially build the parts of the car in front of the plan just by comparing them to what's going on. And then when I switch to the other perspective, I'm seeing it the other way. So it can get you a little dizzy sort of operating in this 3D environment, but it's a pretty practical way to design up something complicated like a car. Next step in the 3D process is the slicing program. This is one called Chitubox or Chitubox. I don't know how you pronounce it. But I did break the car into 4 parts in this case, and the whole car body is one, and the frame and the lower part of the car is one, and the coupler pockets each are separate as well. I found that I could design it so that the trucks, in this case, which are part of the bobber operation, they weren't separate trucks. They roll just great. If with a little experimentation, you can push this car and it'll go scooting down the tracks just like a commercial truck without any problem whatsoever. And I copied a KD coupler pocket, and the couplers fit in and operate beautifully. with the 3D material, so I don't have to use those as separate parts. There were plenty of things that didn't work that well, which I found out by doing things over and over again. But as you can see, a lot of detail sort of built in from the doorknobs to the smoke jack to the different boards on the roof walk and the springs and the undercarriage and everything like that, and all that with a little work came out quite well. So here's a sort of what it looks like. Now, this is actually not number 2005. This is number 2003 that's underway. But this is sort of how it comes out of the printer. And what I found with resin printing is the real job is trying to figure out what angle to print at and how to minimize the supports, because and I'm happy to talk more about the mechanics of this, but you have to support anything that is not coming up essentially from the bottom, and when you remove these supports, it does tend to leave little I call them pock marks. So you want to put the supports, first of all, you want to have as few as you can figure out, and to the degree that you can put them somewhere where they're not going to be visible, it's best. So you'll see that the car body here is upside down with the supports along the edge that it is up against the roof. So they're all hidden by the roof, and there are only a few that are on the window frames to keep those from collapsing in the process. There's a lot more stuff on the lower part of the caboose in this case, but most of it hidden by the fact that it's the bottom of the car. And so a lot of experimentation. Like I said, I've printed these things many times to get them to come out right, but it's worth it. And you can see the kind of detail that you can actually get with a little work on the underframe here with all the brake gear and everything just printed right as part of it. Now this is, I mentioned there are not too many good versions of the car. This is the Bachmann version of a Monpa caboose, not exactly a contest model. And here's number 2005 once I was done with it. And I'm pretty pleased with how it's come out. It rolls beautifully, it couples beautifully. The handrails and some other details were added on, but a lot of the underbody detail is printed, and it's got a nice surface to it. Not very much evidence of it being a digital print. If you look, the sharp-eyed among you may notice that there are no ladders yet. Sort of did that on purpose because it hasn't been weathered, and I think that would be probably do them in, but gonna have it weathered and then add in window glass and the ladders, and I think it'll be a pretty nice model. Done the same thing on some of the Maryland and Pennsylvania Railroad box cars. There are none available in my era that were of this design, the number 500 to 515. And the plans, actually, the only plans that I found are from a Colorado Midland car, which is supposed to be the same. So I had to do this myself as well. And I did it very similarly. And I now have printed 5 of these and lettered and had them weathered by a good friend of mine. Those trucks are commercial trucks, but I've since then created some trucks, arch bar type trucks, 3D printed, and they again roll beautifully and look really good. So I think in the future I'll be printing my own trucks. I won't do the wheel sets, but the trucks are coming out pretty nice. I've also applied 3D printing to structures. This is the Towson Town Station, again later known as Towson, and it needs a little touch up, but everything in the picture here was 3D printed, including the windows. And it was nice to be able to, for example, if you've ever tried to modify a Tichy window to make it look open, you know how frustrating that can be. So I made several versions, partly open in 3D, and they came out, I think, very nicely. And all the this was all printed as one print as well, and just weathered to look like wood. The chimney is a 3D print. The only thing that isn't is the shingles, and I kind of do that. You could do the shingles, but I kind of like the slightly irregular look of laying on the shingles, so I did them that way. But I'll be doing a lot of my structures this way going forward. Okay, so that's it for now for 3D printing. I mentioned in my earlier clinic that I had designed the helix from hell, and figuring that if I was going to design things like this for other people, I should figure out whether it's actually possible to build one. So I did. And I think I described before a little bit of how this helix functions, but here's a reminder that there are actually two parallel helixes. The outside one goes from the lower level to the middle level, and then again, same above that to the upper level, whereas the other one connects the upper level to the lowest level. So the outside helixes are, I think, two turns to get from the lowest level to the middle level, and one more turn to get to the upper level. And the other helix is 5 turns to get back down to York. So it's got a lot of complexities to it. Now, I actually, having designed it as sort of an oval to get a little more running room, in the final product, I found that making it a circle was actually better. So the final helix is a little simpler in that it's a circle rather than an oval, but the challenge was the same. So I did lay it out in SketchUp to figure out all the heights, the angles, and the distance between levels and things like that, because in addition to the entrances and exits to the helix, I also wouldn't let the space go to waste. So as you can see in the track plan, the mine at Whiteford sits up above the helix there, and Dallastown, Pennsylvania sits above the helix there. So all of that had to work, as well as the entrances and exits to the helix. So it was worth the time to design it and scratch my head and try to figure that out before cutting any plywood. And then, helixes are notorious for requiring a lot of wastage of material. So I used the method of a lot of trapezoids, and I cut out 2 sheets worth of 1/4-inch birch plywood and laminated them together. And you can sort of see that as I was building here, like in the lower left, you can see how I've overlapped the 1/4-inch trapezoids to form the arc. And first of all, I'm wasting very little material, but also laminating the two together and getting a very thin but very strong surface that I don't think is gonna warp, knock on wood. So as you can see, as I built it, I just simply put blocks of the same height in between the levels, and I built it sort of temporarily without the track, but didn't glue the arcs together, and then went back and put the tracks on one level at a time and tested them before I put the level on above it. And the final structure is held up by the outside fascia, just regular masonite and some strips of masonite on the inside, and it's very strong structurally, and the grade is very consistent, which you want, there's relatively it's relatively little space between levels, which is good because my whole proof of concept was based on a 440 being able to pull a 3-car passenger train of brass passenger cars up this helix, and I can. So that was a good moment. And to prove that the darn thing actually works, this is a double-headed freight train, 15 cars backing down the helix, so you can see it going. This is the second level where it comes into Baldwin, Maryland, and we're backing down toward Towson Town on the bottom level. So there it goes in, and believe it or not, I actually let it go and walked around the corner and set up the camera on the other side and held my breath. And sure enough, a few minutes later, out it came, still backing, still on the track, going over the 3D printed overpass over York Road in Towson. And then, having traversed the helix perfectly, of course, it went around the corner and fell off the track at a switch that was right out in the open. But, we're still tweaking. So anyway, it works. We can go backwards, we can go forwards, and the 440 can indeed pull up 3 passenger cars without stalling. It's really fun to watch the mid-train helpers because the chuffs are not synchronized, so you get you can hear it, the one going by now, and if we wait just a second, the other one will appear. And it's a lot of fun to run these double headers because they are working hard to get up these even these 2% grades. Yeah, here comes the head end locomotive. The other thing I've been spending a fair amount of time on is bridges and trestles. My first project was the jail trestle, which was on the what is now on the grounds of Towson University. It's certainly, even the landscaping has been filled in, so there's nothing remaining of it now. But it was a little south of the Towson station and York Road, and a pretty good sized trestle. Again, only a certain number of photos available, but I did my best to go back and forth. Drew out a typical bent, and using that in order to estimate the kind of materials I was going to need. And the jail trestle on my railroad is not full size. It's about 2/3 of the size of the original. So it is a little bit compressed lengthwise. But the gross trestle that I'll show you in a minute is full size for the prototype, or should I say will be full size for the prototype. They're not terribly tall trestles. The tallest bent on the jail trestle was 41 feet, but I think it came out pretty nice. This is on the railroad now with caboose number 2002 being pulled over it. All strip wood, except for the nut bolt washer castings, which were 3D printed. Saved myself a lot of time, trouble, and money by printing those out in 3D. Next up, and I'm underway on the gross trestle, which was famous and also the biggest trestle on the line, about 450 feet long and 45 or 46 feet high at the highest point. This was near Sharon, Maryland, which is north of Bel Air. And one thing that I didn't realize until fairly recently, but you can see it quite well in this photograph, is that the gross trestle was super elevated, and it's kind of hard to wonder why they super elevated a trestle when the maximum top speed on the Mon-Pa was about 40 miles an hour. So I don't know if they were trying to be ready for Acellas or what, but it was in fact super elevated, and you can sort of see the train leaning over here as it goes around. So I haven't completely decided whether I'm going to do that or not, but it would still be possible. Like I say, this is the gross trestle with some assembly required. This is strip wood stained with Hunter line creosote staining, and then I built all the 35 bents, getting measurements from the Historical Society of how tall each one. They were all, of course, different. heights, but I think that's pretty important to the look and feel of the original trestle. And then here's a sample of the NBW castings 3D printed, but before they're painted. And I so far for the bents of the trestle gone through 4 of these, which makes me glad I'm not buying them and paying for them that way. But I have yet to do the lateral bracing and also the NBWs that were holding down the guardrails on either side of the tracks. But you can see on the left is where it's going to go, and you can see the track is finished as well. But what I haven't done is to stick the bents on the track. But this is going to be, I think, a really nice scene, even though it's very, very thin. When you walk in the railroad, this is going to be right in front of you, and I think it'll be pretty spectacular. And then on the right, you can see the very gentle by model railroading standards curve that I was doing, and I had to print out a template to make sure I was getting the curve right, and then glue it together. But it's pretty stable once it's all done. So about the last thing to talk about is my experiments so far with operations. I actually had set up the railroad for a car card and waybill system, and then got introduced to the JMRI operations module at the last MARPM event. And since I didn't have enough else to do, I decided to dive into that, and it's pretty cool. I got to say, I have not figured it all out. Figured out everything it can't do right away, but still trying to figure out how to make it do some of the things I want it to do. But the basic idea is that you enter all your towns and industries, and I've got 59, or I will have 59 places to put cars when the whole thing is done, and enter that into the system, and then all your cars and locomotives, and it will create manifests based on various parameters randomly, so that you're getting a lot of car movement, and it will spit out, once you've done a little work, a manifest that looks sort of like this. And this is actually just the Baltimore transfer operation, so it's not going from town to town, but it shows the car numbers and roads and what they are, and it's going from track to another track here, and that's all generated each time you operate. So it's always different, and depending on how well you've set up the program, it's putting the various kinds of loads from where they should be going to where they should be ending up, and creating a fairly realistic flow of traffic like that. So still learning the program and playing with it to try to make sure it does what I want it to do. But so far it's kind of fun, and rather than carrying around a bunch of car cards that you drop on the floor and get out of order and things like that, it's just one sheet of paper, and you can check off things as you get them done. So what's next? Still a lot to do. I'm not going to run out of things to do anytime soon. I'm going to complete the gross trestle, which is an important link in the main line, and also soon to start on the final leg of the bench work. Now, one thing I didn't mention is that the bench work, as you've seen it, is about 2/3 done on each level. So you start in Baltimore and you get as far as Baldwin, Maryland, and then there's a Grand Canyon in between that and the rest of the second level. And similarly, when you get to the third level, you get through the helix, and nothing happens until you get to High Rock. And so I basically have 3 disconnected railroads right now, which need to be connected to one another to give me a main line that's continuous. Fortunately, a lot of the hard parts, especially the helix and the swing gate, are done or very nearly done. So I think the final bench work is going to be relatively simple, and that my hope is by this time next year to have a complete main line. Finishing up Caboose's number 2003 and 2004, which were basically the same, and I've got the pieces all printed out, and I'm happy with them. I just need to do the detail work and paint and weather, and have also launched into a unique air dump car that the Ma and Pa had. In fact, I had two of them, which I've designed up, but haven't quite finished the designs. So that's my next 3D rolling stock process. It's going to be a pretty unusual, unique car once it's done. Whoops. Sorry, I've got a hungry cat here helping me out. I've similarly printed out a very distinctive building called the Record Mill that was in Bel Air. It's printed, but it's not finished yet, but that's going to be a sort of a centerpiece in Bel Air. Very soon going to have a Operation Sea Trial. Going to get some friends over and see if we can break what's been done so far in terms of operations. And as I mentioned, I'm hoping to have a Golden Spike ceremony sometime next year. That'll get a lot of the heavy construction out of the way, which has been part of my goal. Leave me with a tremendous amount of detail work and scenery and additional track work and rolling stock and things like that to keep me busy for as long as I shall live. So also I think it's going to be a lot of fun to have operating sessions when sorry, the cat's helping me out here. Going to have full operating sessions when the main line is completed, and should be able to run a pretty full Ma and Pa schedule, including passenger trains and through freights and locals, as well as some good yard operations in York and Baltimore. So that's what I've got for you today. Happy to answer any questions, but before I finish my presentation, I did want to remind you of my mantra, which is that you can never, ever have too many clamps when you're building a model railroad. And final look at Woodbrook at night, and be happy to take any questions.
We put some questions in the chat.
Okay, let's see. Cat will help me find them here. All right. How are the trucks wearing? Are they being run with the friction, or any issues noted with that? Yeah, good question, Lee. I haven't had them in operation long enough to notice any problem, but I don't know why they should be any more friction than any other material. It's pretty slick plastic when you're done, and it rolls very freely. So it could be that after a certain amount of wear and tear, they'll seize up. But so far so good. I'll let you know in 10 years if it worked or not. Gil, I think I could probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 9 operators, and the reason is that although it's not a big railroad, I think it could accommodate 5 or 6 people in the main aisleway. The main aisleway is 4 feet wide, and that's where the Baltimore yard people would be working, and you could have 2 or 3 engineers out on the main line at the same time without people being on top of each other, I think. The York yard, on the other hand, could be operated from the outside the aisle. You can actually reach it from both sides. So my idea is that the York people will be outside the main operating aisle, which will keep them out of the way, but still be pretty accessible. And then if you add to that an agent and a dispatcher who could realistically either be in another room or even at their home on a computer, if I get set up like Bob Rodriguez or something, it could keep, like I say, 6, 7, 8, 9 people busy without getting too crowded. But that may be too ambitious. We'll see. But there's certainly plenty for everybody to do.
Just a comment from my experience, I have a 2-level layout and I saw that you have 3, and that's why I got concerned because, and I have quite wide, aisles. I have 6 foot and over aisles. And
Yeah.
still people were complaining, my operators were complaining at some point that, they were stepping on each other, one trying to operate the upper level, one trying to operate the lower level. So I ended up, and I'm glad to see that you use JMRI operations because that will let you carefully schedule the train and also create all the, scheduling graphs that you need and everything. And
Yeah,
if you use
yeah.
that feature, which is quite advanced, that eventually led me to solve the problem. Basically not preventing people from operating at the same time on both levels. But we have a group of 10 people about the same, and that's a typical issue that you have to resolve.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be times
one-
that. Go ahead.
One little comment, sorry, about the question before that about the trucks. I don't know if you've tried that, but there's like I saw that you're using a resin printer, and there's a resin that's ABS-like,
Mhm.
and it would wear much less than, the typical regular resin, but I haven't seen a need to use it. I mean, the
Yeah.
regular resin works just fine.
Yeah. Good to know. So, yeah, and Lee on the laminating is, as you saw, I was doing the trapezoids, and if I was, butting one up against the other, obviously the joint would not be very strong, whereas I'm overlapping the trapezoids by laminating them together, and that's quite strong. I think a lot stronger than if I just had. Now, you could cut circles out of 1/2-inch plywood that might be as strong, but then you're gonna waste a lot of material cutting out those kind of loops for a helix. So I thought I'd try the 1/4-inch laminated to other 1/4-inch, and it's been pretty strong.
So the joints
those
overlap
things.
each other.
Yeah.
Okay,
can-
gotcha.
I can go
Okay.
back to that picture if you'd like to see it again. I went by it pretty fast. And then, yeah, Gil, I've tried printing at every angle known to man, and it's interesting, and I can't say again, I haven't been doing it long enough to come up with as many principles, but I've often gotten better results printing flat on something like a car body, especially if it's hollow, and just the 4 walls, it isn't putting that much stress on the, you can see in the lower left how the joints are kind of overlapped on the trapezoids there to get that strength, but keep it very thin. Obviously, if you were joining 1/2-inch pieces together, you'd have to have some kind of a splice plate or something, which
Okay.
would make it a lot thicker. Does that
Do you
make sense?
bother? Yeah, and then you're bothering at the end of it, I guess it looks like you rounded them off anyway after that. So, okay.
I did. Yeah, I ran a saw around the edge so that which again just saved me whoops, I'm sorry. Saved me another 1/2 inch or so when I and just glued and screwed this to the masonite outer shell, so it's very little wasted space, which I needed to keep my aisle as big as I could.
Would you mind sharing your plan for that?
Oh, sure.
That'd be really helpful because that's pretty slick.
Thank you. In case you don't have it, I'll put my email in the chat, and I will be happy to send it to you. I mean, you certainly can see the plan. Depending on the radius you're using, you really do have to watch out for making sure it's big enough that you're not sideswiping yourself and that kind of thing. But so it takes a little calculation, but I'll send you whatever I have, and if it's useful, I hope so. Let's see. Volunteers for the operating sessions. Yes, Bill. Eventually, yes. Give me a little time, give me a little time. Let's see, whatever. Resin ones did have issues. Lee, I don't know what you're referring to there in terms of the resin ones.
The trucks, I know there was some other resin trucks, some of the manufacturers, when they had
Uh-huh.
they did the trucks and the resin would wear out fairly quickly. That's why I was asking
Okay.
about the 3D printed ones, if it's holding. But I guess
Yeah.
I don't have the experience once it figures it out.
We'll find out. We'll find out. You know, good thing is if they do wear out, I'll just print some more.
There you go.
As long as I save the file and it's just a little more resin and paint. But how are you determining what colors to paint your structures? Thank you. Good question. And you know, not very scientifically in terms of the colors. I have to think, you know, what little I know is that, you know, in the 20s, things tended to be pretty bland, you know, just because there were not that many paint colors available. And so I'm sort of going for generally whites and grays and blacks and things like that, rather than anything very vivid. In fact, there's that one structure in High Rock that I decided ought to be yellow for variety, and it's almost, you know, I don't know if it's going to fade with time, but it's almost too vivid somehow. It doesn't quite look right to me. So I may man up and repaint it at some point. But I did talk to the gentleman who does did a lot of plans. He's sort of a fan and architect, and did a lot of plans for Ma and Pa structures. And I asked him about the Towson station. And, you know, I said, should it be cream and brown, you know, which is pretty typical. And he said, not in the 20s, you know, yes, by the time you get to the 40s and 50s, but in the 20s, it was probably somewhat prison-like. So I did paint that gray and black, and, you know, we'll find out. Somebody probably at some point will tell me I'm wrong, but in the meantime, it looks pretty good. Okay, let's see. I think that's all the questions. If there are any more, feel free to shoot me an email or anything else.
Well, I had one thought.
Sure.
Looking at your map, I realized, I don't know what I knew this before, that the Maryland and Pennsylvania is a north-south railroad.
Mhm.
And north-south railroads are very rare in the United States. I can only think of two others, the
Mhm.
Illinois Central and the Louisville and Nashville.
Mhm.
Neat.
Yeah, I think so. Well, I used to think, you know, at one point, the way the Mountain Pa was built, you know, it goes up toward Delta, and I had heard that the original plan was to cross the Susquehanna River there and go into Philadelphia, which would have changed things a lot. And that they figured out a little too late that they didn't have the technology to build a bridge that long back when the original route was done, and they changed their minds and went up, turned left and went to York instead. I was corrected when I said that at another clinic, and the guy said, well, that really wasn't what happened. It was two narrow gauge railroads that came together, and they were both planning to go to Philadelphia, but couldn't bridge the river at that point, and decided to connect up to each other and eventually become the Ma and Pa. But I thought it was funnier when I said it was because they just turned left and went to York instead of Philadelphia.